Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 56 of Sports Week, back after a little break during Memorial Day weekend. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
A lot to get to on this show. The NBA postseason is in full swing. A lot going on. The Lakers just got bounced. The Clippers having trouble with the Mavs. Upsets aplenty. The Nets rolling against Boston. We'll get into all of that, along with all the other fan incidents that we've seen here now that a lot of arenas have full capacity. We'll also talk about all the latest in the MLB, including the recent spike of injuries and the latest action across Major League Baseball. But before I get to that, we're great to be joined today by Rahill Jaiswal, back from the Nothing But Sports podcast. We love having him on as a guest. But before we get to him, Tim, just quickly, I want to get your impressions because we didn't do a show last week on the Indy 500 with Helio Castroneves going to victory lane. Of course, a big moment. The fans loved it. 46 years old, his fourth win. He goes right up in the ranks with those guys. And I mean, he had a good time. All the fans loved it. And I thought it was a really good race despite having only a couple of cautions. What's your opinions on the race?
Yeah, this was one of the few races this year where I literally watched from start to finish, from lap one all the way to the end. And really, from the start of this thing, you knew it was going to be a good race. If you know nothing about IndyCar, that is not a problem. When you have weather, clear as can be, hardly any wind. I believe it was 68 degrees, maybe 70. In terms of track temp, it was up to 110. But in terms of Indianapolis itself, it was around 70 degrees and as perfect the weather as you can get for an Indy 500. And from the start of that thing, the atmosphere was just absolutely beautiful. The fans, I mean, how about when Connor Daly took the lead? The fans were electric. You would have thought someone else would have taken the lead, like you would have thought maybe one of the Andrettis or maybe, Tony Kanaan or Scott DeMond. People a little bit don't like Scott Dixon as much anymore, but guys like Scott Dixon and so on, dominate and make moves and so on. But Connor Daly getting a massive outburst, being the hometown guy to get out there in the lead. It was huge. And I'll tell you what, going down to the end of that thing, I was on my seat. I thought Graham Rahal was going to win based on strategy. And then the team made a mistake in the pits. They didn't put the left rear tire all the way on. It came apart as he's coming out of the pits. And instantly you knew the strategy that we thought was going to win the race wasn't going to win the race. And then once they came back green, the battle was absolutely on. But that post-race celebration for me was by far one of the best post-race celebrations I've seen in my lifetime. By far the best one in IndyCar and in Indy 500 history. But overall, for Helio Castroneves, I mean, that ranks up there right now, Eddie, for me, top three, right there with Dale Jr., after that 2001 Pepsi 400 victory. And of course, the 1998 Daytona 500 when Dale Sr. got congratulated by everybody up and down pit road. The amount of sportsmanship you'd seen from drivers, Roger Penske himself, obviously now being in charge of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and also Helio's former team owner. And what makes this one more special, forget about the fact that he tied the all-time record for Indy 500 wins. I think the thing that makes this more special that people forget, it's not easy to win races when you're in there every single week as it is. This man came off the couch and put a whooping to drivers. Granted, yes, the equipment's great and so on. That doesn't matter as much. He put a whooping to drivers in Indianapolis that drivers couldn't even do if they wanted to, that show up every week. So the fact that 46 years old, he is doing something that no one else can. And by the way, Pablo Montoya was in that race too. A lot of people forget about that as well. Granted, again, underfunded team and so on, but that was a little bit, of a surprise that he was competing for around 10th spot. Thought he would have done better. But huge for Helio, huge for motorsports. And I don't want to jump the NASCAR ship, but of course, Rick Hendrick breaking a record that night as well for all-time wins in team ownership was a beautiful day for motorsports and one of the best in history.
Yeah, NASCAR rolling along with the Coke 600. Kyle Larson won that race. But before we get to the NBA, one last thing I just want to brush off on the Indy 500. Well, really two things. First of all, this is reflective of the continued trend everybody's talking about with the old guys coming out on top all across sports. Of course, Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl. Phil Mickelson at 50 years old winning a golf major just 2 weeks ago, the PGA Championship. That was great to see. And Now, he kind of got the last laugh. We'll see if Tiger Woods can somehow come back from that injury and maybe win another major. I see Rahill's face. I don't see that happening. But you know what? Phil Mickelson, 50 years old. That's pretty cool. And then now Elio Castroneva is doing that. But I feel like that was a great celebration and great day for IndyCar. But I almost feel like, the excitement we're seeing, it's sort of exacerbated by the fact that this was the first real sporting event that we saw with so many people there. There were 135,000 people at the Indy 500, by far the most for anything in the past year and a half. So I feel like that kind of was shocking. And to hear the loud noise of the crowd, it's been so weird to hear that. And we've also seen it in the NBA, but some of the crowd stuff has not been good in the first round. There have been numerous fan incidents. The one with Kyrie Irving having a water bottle thrown at him, that the fan is facing 10 years in prison potentially for that. I don't know about that, but there's that. There's the incident with Trae Young getting spat on. There's the incident with Ja Morant's dad having an incident with Utah Jazz fans. Russell Westbrook having popcorn dumped at him, coming off the court, leaving for an injury. And we know the NBA has gone through phases where it's been a tough league. And we've seen, thinking back to the 80s and the 90s where you'd see players get thrown down constantly. But fans usually didn't engage in this. And I know everybody we're all, and it's not just when it comes to basketball or being a fan, in life, we're kind of adjusting back to those boundaries as we kind of vaccinated, coming back to the world, getting back to normal. But I think some of these people have just kind of forgotten about typical behavior that a fan should have, because it's not one event. We saw 4 of the 8 series be really plagued by stupid things that fans did. There was at least 6 different incidents during the first round. So, Rahill, do you think the NBA has a serious problem on this front, and what can they do to try to control it through the rest of the postseason?
Well, the problem is, Eddie, what do you do to control it? The problem with the NBA is fans have the opportunity of sitting, we don't see these things in baseball and football because fans are so far away. You're in right field, you're in center field, you're way behind home plate. But with the NBA, I mean, you're so close up to the action, and fans are just, I don't know. I mean, you said it yourself, but I mean, the spitting incident, I was at game 2 and I didn't see the fans spit, but just think about how stupid you have to be to lift out, as we're coming out of a global pandemic, lift down your mask and spit across 2 rows of fans. How would you, keep in mind that these NBA, Kevin Durant said it best. They're humans. They're not machines. They're not zoo animals. These guys are also trying to get paid when they play. So how would you feel if you were working at your desk somewhere, someone comes up to you and just spits on you because they don't like you? It's absolute BS. And I don't know what the NBA can do from here. Is there a way now to make sure they don't have that access to the court? Even in the Washington game, we saw a fan run on the court, but that's more normal. But Eddie, you also mentioned this before. This is only the first round, so what can you imagine for a place like Philly or something in an Eastern Conference Finals, which they will most likely get to at this rate? And the same thing with Utah. They're most likely probably maybe going to get to the West Finals. So the question is, your question, what do you do? I don't know what to do, because it's just so hard to try and do stuff, because no matter what you do, there's always going to be a couple bad apples at fans, at games. But especially the water. I just don't understand this, Eddie. I really don't.
There's just, some of them are just so egregious. Russell Westbrook, you might not like the guy. He does have a history also of engaging with fans in the past, but he got hurt. He's getting help to the locker room. You're going to dump popcorn on him. And there's also a level of, it's not everybody can afford to go to an NBA game. And, you kind of got to, accept the opportunity that you have. The Knicks one, especially, you're watching the video. The guy's sitting in the second row at Madison Square Garden for a playoff game. That's costly. That's worth a lot of money. He's sitting 1 row behind 50 Cent. He's sitting right there with the celebs. What? Why are you have the privilege to be there? You shouldn't be doing that, because as you've seen, these NBA teams rightfully have taken action and banned these fans from attending. These teams specifically have banned fans from coming back to those arenas. But like Rahill alluded to, the conference titles will likely go through Philadelphia and Utah, who have 2 of the more, I'd say, aggressive fan bases, and that might even be an understatement here. And, there's a lot of bad blood between some of these teams. Phoenix and Utah have a history, and they could potentially match up. The Nets and the Sixers have a history. They had a big fight in the playoffs that actually spilled into the first row of seats just a couple of years ago. And we know there's a lot of personalities, clashing personalities in both of those teams. So I really hope the NBA can kind of get this cleaned up. Tim, what can you add to this?
Yeah, you mentioned Utah in particular, and listen, this is not the first rodeo for them regarding the fact of a racist incident with, rather if it's players or players' families. I mean, to my understanding of what was said, by no means, forget about the fact we're in 2021, but to say 1900 slang just is by no means acceptable. And the fact that you're saying it to a player's family, listen, they're not the ones that signed up to play this game. Their children did. And rather you like someone or not, at the end of the day, granted their skin color, because listen, first off, it's wrong. It's wrong to judge anyone based upon their skin color. Being racist today, and for any case, is absolutely wrong. But if you want to put things on the players, then hold it against the player. You have a problem, hold it against the player. Don't hold it against the people that raised the player. Don't hold it against the people that are there to show their support for their loved ones. They didn't sign up for this. But for the record, we're seeing this in the MLB too. See Justin Wilson on Twitter before? People were tagging first off the wrong Justin Wilson, which I thought was hilarious. But at the same time, they were also going at his wife and other people. That's not acceptable. Those people don't deserve that kind of bad treatment. Now, I'm going to say this. Yes, unfortunately, we've had 4 different incidents. And I'm not saying the NBA can't do anything, but this isn't the first time we've had this problem either. Having popcorn dropped on players has happened for a very long time, might I add. How about James Harden? Remember a few years ago, in multiple games in series, he had popcorn dropped on him, going back to locker rooms and so on. And in terms of the racist thing for Utah, James Harden had it happen to him. Russell Westbrook, everyone forget about that rivalry with the Thunder, how Utah Jazz fans were to them. Unfortunately, from a standpoint, yes, and Rahill kind of mentioned a little bit too, there are some bad apples in the bunch that you just can't take out and you can't, adjust for. But for the NBA, you just have to find a way to hold individuals to standards. I don't know how, if you do that, if maybe playoff games, you add more security to, make things matter a little bit more in terms of protecting your players, especially the fact that fans, like you alluded to in terms of baseball, can be closer. Players, when they're in dugouts in baseball, they can just exit right on the dugout. They don't get stuff thrown at them. They go back inside through their dugouts. In football, football a little bit too. You can get stuff thrown at you because you're going back to locker room past fans. I think that's another great example. But for basketball, you literally almost have to go through the crowd at times to get to where your destination needs to be. So if you're the NBA, you've got to add security. You've got to do a better job at making sure these players are safer. Because God forbid, if you see another Ron Artest situation, which give NBA credit to its point, since that incident, nothing like that remotely close has happened again. But I can understand the frustration of players 100%. And the fact that you have some of the rowdiest fan bases that are still left in this playoff, you got to protect the players. At the end of the day, rivalries are rivalries. I've seen a lot of stuff happen in Yankees Red Sox games, for example, through my time. Especially people getting beer dumped on them and so on. Even that's not acceptable. But I'd rather take that than have the players be in full risk out there on the field. So to me, protect your players. Not saying fans come secondary, but you got to take control somehow. And it's really the NBA's responsibility, not as much as these teams and their individual stadiums.
Yeah, and you said it. Like, the NBA has a history with this, and you really don't want it to lead to another Malice in the Palace, because, of course, that was a really bad scene for the NBA. And specifically in the time you mentioned the racist comments, especially during an era right now where we are so polarized as a society about any sort of racial remarks, more so than maybe any time since maybe the 1960s. It is a very divisive time on that subject, and you really don't want to mess with that. And like you said, it's the first round. It's a little nerve-wracking heading forwards, but I do think the NBA can take some small actions like Tim alluded to. And really, just the important thing to remember, everybody's trying to get used to this. The players are trying to get used to playing in front of fans again, these packed crowds. The fans are trying to get used to, watching games and behaving correctly. And hopefully the fact that the NBA teams have taken action rightfully and quickly and efficiently to discipline these fans who have done these stupid acts hopefully deters any further bad actions in the second round. But let's actually focus on the court now. And one of the biggest stories, the Los Angeles Lakers bounced. Now, of course, at the beginning of the season, we did not see this happening, but I've kind of had a little bit of a moment where I've kind of considered the Lakers a little more before I came onto the show. It's almost like, now, it's really hard. I don't want to call it a Mickey Mouse championship last year, but last year's circumstances were just so unique for the Lakers to win the championship. I'm not saying they were not a championship caliber team, because pre-pandemic, they were absolutely the best team in the Western Conference, undisputed, without a doubt. But I do think that situation sort of helped them and LeBron's experience playing in the playoffs and just being a very talented basketball player. And also the fact that the Lakers were extremely healthy throughout the postseason when there were so many teams that were missing significant players all the way through the bubble, I think helped them out. I'm considering this year and comparing it to 2 years ago when the Lakers, of course, were a couple games out, ended up missing the playoffs in LeBron's first season, and ended up spurring them to trading for Anthony Davis. But think about it. Other than Anthony Davis being there's really not that much of an improvement on this Lakers roster from the team 2 years ago. I know everybody likes to talk about Montrezl Harrell and Dennis Schroeder, and those are nice complementary players. But in the end, I don't feel like these guys are that much better than having a Lonzo Ball or a Brandon Ingram out there. I think they all have their own tangible goals and their all tangible abilities, but I don't really think that it's that much of an improvement. And as you see, compared to 2 years ago, when LeBron did not have AD and was hurt, they missed the playoffs. This year, he has AD, he's hurt, Davis is hurt. All they can do is get to the first round and appear pretty lifeless against the Phoenix Suns, who, by the way, credit to them, really good team. Devon Booker, I think, is still criminally underrated. He scored 70 points in a game once in the NBA. Only 6 players have ever done that in history, and everybody just seems to forget about that. And Chris Paul, I know a lot of people talk about Chris Paul's personality and such, but Chris Paul is 37 years old, still playing like an all-star as a point guard, and playing through injury for a good portion of this series as well. And DeAndre Ayton, very underrated. But that being said, the Lakers, now, first of all, I think it would have been really funny if they had been eliminated in the play-in tournament, which LeBron had been a proponent of the year before, and then says this year that whoever created it should be fired. Well, look where we are now. He got through that, but can't beat the Suns. Can't say I'm surprised, especially with Anthony Davis hurt. LeBron's still not seeming 100%, but Rahill, what do you make of this series?
I mean, you kind of hit on it best. I mean, last year in the bubble, a lot of guys for them stepped up big. KCP hit a lot of big threes down the stretch in those games against Miami. Danny Green, when he needed to, knock down the threes. It wasn't great. He got a lot of slander for it, but he did knock down some threes. And Kuzma was okay. Dwight Howard was pretty good in the pick and roll situation. You look at the Lakers moves this season. Marc Gasol severely underperformed. So did Dennis Schroeder. So did Montrezl Harrell. And where the hell was Andre Drummond? I mean, they couldn't even start him because he was that bad. I mean, Drummond was averaging at one point in the season 30 and 20 in Cleveland or something like that. He comes to a big market and he flops. Same thing with Schroeder. Keep in mind, Dennis Schroeder turned down an $84 million extension because he wanted $100 million. He ain't getting that now. He scored, first of all, he scored 0 points in game 4. I had the same amount of points sitting on my couch. In game 5. Game 6, he was fine, but he was horrible for most of this series. And keep in mind, he was runner-up to Montrezl Harrell in the 6th Man of the Year race. And where was he this whole series? I mean, no one's going to give that man $100 million now. He's really messed up. He could have had $84 million. Bet on himself, didn't. And also, you look at the fact now, could the Lakers have maybe kept Brandon Ingram and they could have traded Lonzo Ball and Kyle Kuzma for Anthony Davis? Because Brandon Ingram is playing unbelievable right now in New Orleans. So you look at that as well. Even, Julius Randle, he was there as well a couple years ago. He had a brilliant season in New York. He didn't play well in the postseason, but he had a brilliant season in New York. And you just look at what Kuzma did. And then you also go back to the fact that they locked him up with a $40 million extension. It's a real tough situation. And LeBron even said it, that if AD's not healthy and I'm not 100%, there's no way we on a high ankle sprain, especially for a guy like LeBron, who really who really relies on athleticism and attack because he's not a great 3-point shooter. You want him to take threes, and you just couldn't be aggressive enough to carry a team. And I think another aspect is we have to start realizing that LeBron is getting up near 40 years old. He's going to need help. We can't expect him to do what he did in 2018 with the Cavaliers. 2 reasons. 1, the Western Conference is way stronger. And 2, it's just no matter how great your body is in shape, you're eventually going to break down. Now, I don't think he's breaking down completely. I think he'd still play an MVP level. But it's just tough. It's just tough for now. He's nearing up 38 years old. You can't expect him to carry a team, especially considering he wasn't 100%. And it was against maybe the best team in the NBA, the Phoenix Suns.
Now, I am going to disagree with you a little bit on that because I don't think you did say LeBron is not completely breaking down at this point yet. A lot of it was due to his injury, but I sort of feel like it's not as much on LeBron, and it's more so the fact that there are so much young talent in this league that is coming up. Devon Booker, Trae Young, Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, who are all becoming stars. I mean, this is the next era of NBA stars. We didn't really have that many that had young stars other than like Giannis Antetokounmpo over a few year stretch. But now we have all these guys 2-3 years into their career who are becoming, faces of their respective teams and are really up there and competing with the established stars of LeBron and Harden and Kawhi and Giannis and Steph Curry. And I really think that's part of the deal here. But I still think LeBron James can contribute in other ways. Of course, he's become an elite passer now, which was not nearly his forte. We've seen him change his game multiple times. Remember back in Cleveland, his first time around, he was not even a 3-point shooter at all. Then in Miami, he started to explore it a little bit. Then, of course, the passing, the rebounding, becoming, in some ways, he could even get some triple doubles, which was something he didn't do in his past. I mean, he continues to evolve, and that's what makes LeBron so dangerous. But this loss this season and now 2 out of 3 bad years in LA is going to look tough when it comes to LeBron's legacy. So, Tim, where do the Lakers go from here, and how would you assess LeBron's legacy, of course, in the everlasting GOAT debate with Michael Jordan?
Well, it's funny. I was talking about the GOAT debate earlier, and listen, at the end of the day, you can believe who you want at number one. Both played at different eras, and so be it. But for me, LeBron still tops Michael Jordan. I know that sounds crazy, but you have to remember this. LeBron is a freak athlete. He can play all 5 positions if he genuinely wanted to. He has the size and the athleticism when he's not flopping around or, whining on the court to actually play with the guys I would imagine back in Michael Jordan's era. I'm not saying he would dominate, but at the same time, I'm saying you can compare him to both eras much more compared to Michael Jordan, which is the reason why I could see LeBron being a very strong debate for being the greatest of all time, putting championships aside. And I think anyone can agree, kind of like a Mike Trout, for example, LeBron is the most versatile basketball player of all time, that simply put. But we want to talk about the Lakers. Listen, I think we already proved that 2 years ago that just LeBron James cannot save that basketball franchise. They need a lot more help. And yes, they won the Mickey Mouse Championship last year, as you alluded to, Eddie. But at the end of the day, when you get complacent, we talk about this in sports all the time. A, it's hard enough to win a championship 2 times in a row. But also B, when you think about it, it is hard to be consistent when you are absolutely complacent as a roster and as a team. And sure, changes did happen. But realistically speaking, after they lost a couple guys that past offseason, do you really think that team got better? Sure, they got shorter. That's great. Don't get me wrong. But on paper, did that team really get better? And truthfully, if you think about it, if you're this Lakers organization from an overall standpoint, did you really think an older LeBron and an older Anthony Davis were going to be healthy? Did you really think they were going to be, playing 35, 36 minutes all year long, every single game without a problem happening? I mean, come on, this is sports in 2021. Everyone knows injuries is at an all-time high in every sport. You have to assume something. LeBron can't carry the load forever. Not saying he can't be a good basketball player, but come on now. The man's closing in towards his 40s, needless to say. He cannot play 37, 38 minutes a game like he used to back in his, rookie years when he came straight out of high school for Cleveland. So at the end of the day, again, you want to debate GOAT, so on. LeBron's easily one of the top 2 players in NBA history. There's no debate about that. But at the end of the day, when you look at it in terms of the Lakers, rebuild, revitalize, and rejuvenate this team. Because at the end of the day, and I'm not saying Anthony Davis and LeBron need to go, but you need something a lot more than those two. Otherwise, you have no development, no future, and an everlasting cycle losing the future.
So let's shift to the other coast now. The New York Knicks. Well, they won a playoff game, and Manhattan fittingly partied like they just won the championship, but they couldn't win anything else. And Trae Young has now, found his way into the heads, living rent-free in the head of every single Knicks fan out there now. But you know what? Solid season. People are frustrated with how they performed. People are frustrated with how Julius Randle performed in the postseason, but nobody even thought the Knicks were coming anywhere close to the playoffs. I mean, the team did not have much roster change at all from last season when they were abysmal to this season. And they bring in Derrick Rose in a trade. And after Derrick Rose had really been an abomination his first time through with New York, and things worked. Emmanuel Quickley was a good draft pick. Obi Toppin got progressively better as the season went on. Reggie Bullock has hit 3-pointers and has found a place in the team. Of course, Randall, R.J. Barrett, both emerging as really strong players, even without Mitchell Robinson for a good part of the season. You had veteran big men like Taj Gibson and Nerlens Noel stepping up. Good year for the Knicks, I think, and Rahill, I think this could really be a springboard for them to continue to develop. And Tom Thibodeau, definitely a great choice for coach there in the Mecca.
Oh yeah, 100%. I have the Game 2 towel sitting on my desk right there. But obviously it's disappointing, and a lot of fans are gonna start to slander Julius Randle, and that's just how it works in New York. We have to come to that realization. You're the savior. He was a savior for all 72 games of the regular season, and then to be completely honest, he didn't play that poorly in Game 5. I mean, he played all right, and I think as all New Yorkers, I think we got caught up in the fact that Atlanta is just way more talented. If you look at their roster, they have a lot better players. And the Knicks, I mean, it was an unbelievable season, but what was the one thing that bailed them out in the regular season? Defense. It doesn't work when everyone starts playing defense like that in the postseason. All of a sudden, the Knicks can't score. They need to score. Sure, Quickly might be that for you in the future, but right now they just don't have that number one scoring option. Alec Burks did his thing in Game 1 off the bench. He was good, but he's not. They need a number one scorer, and most of the year they ran ISO ball through Julius Randle, and we've seen thousands of times ISO ball just doesn't work in the postseason. So thankfully, I was at the one game that they won because the Garden was going absolutely insane. But it's people are obviously disappointed that they only got 5 games, considering after the first 2 games it looked like the series could go 7 with the way they played. And Trae Young is, we can talk about Trae Young all that. I have mixed feelings about him. He's a great player, but I think he just epitomizes how soft the NBA is now today with the foul call he gets. But I think almost every NBA team is soft these days. But Eddie, you said it's still a great season. At this point, as a Knicks fan, I would have been thinking, all right, what are our lottery odds? The fact that they went 10 games over 500, finished number 4, top in defensive efficiency. I mean, it's a real stepping stone. We'll see what they do with Julius Randle now. He says he wants to finish out his career in New York. He's still relatively young. He's only 28 years old. R.J. Barrett, still there. Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin. They've got some really good young guys. Derrick Rose said he would love to come back for next season. Hopefully, I know the Lakers will probably make a push for him, but we'll see. And I got one message. Hey, Damian Lillard, you want to come to New York? I mean, Portland's not doing it for you. Why don't you request a trade and come over here? And there's some options out there in free agency. Bradley Beal's going to hit the free agency market as well sometime in the next couple of years. So maybe even Kyle Lowry. There's some options for the New York Knicks, but it's a really good season. It's a disappointing end, but nevertheless it's a phenomenal season for New York.
I'll still believe it when I see it, when the Knicks can actually sign a star. But let's be honest. This was a good effort by them, and they have the tools for the future. They still have tons of draft picks. I believe over the next 5 years, they have the second most draft picks in the NBA, only behind the Thunder, of course, which just stockpiled them. And they've drafted well later in the draft, thinking about Mitchell Robinson was a second-round pick, Emmanuel Quickly towards the end of the first round. They've made some good acquisitions through the draft the past couple of years, and we'll see if they can continue with that. But next team I kind of want to dive into, well, really it's a matchup, which I think is going to, with the Lakers gone and any sort of hope of some crazy LeBron comeback now gone, I think a real telltale sign of who could potentially win the NBA championship will come from the Eastern Conference semifinals between the Brooklyn Nets and the Milwaukee Bucks. And my concern for the Nets is stopping Giannis Antetokounmpo. We know this team can score, but we saw Jason Tatum, who does not have nearly the size, the physique, or the athleticism of Giannis Antetokounmpo, put up 40-plus points in 3 of the 5 games in that series. And Giannis Antetokounmpo is a beast. I mean, it's so difficult to try to contain him. And thinking about who the Nets have, a regular center, you can't really put him on them because they won't be mobile enough. Blake Griffin, shorter than Giannis and also not as mobile. And Kevin Durant is a solid defender, but isn't really going to be able to stop Antetokounmpo. So it's really going to rely on the offense, and they have to stop everybody aside from Giannis. I think this could be the series of the postseason. I think we're going to see a lot of close games. These two teams played a lot of close games in the regular season. But Tim, I'll go over to you first. What are you looking to see in this Nets-Bucks series?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I think that you're going to start seeing the battle of whose offense can play better. And I know we've talked about this, at least for the Nets, of, how can they outshoot other teams all season long with the lack of defense they played for the most part. This time around, I really think you're going to see how physical Milwaukee can get, and overall, which team can, of course, as well shoot better beyond the arc. I think the real big thing, though, when you look at the series is too, and I think it's almost safe to say, whoever wins this series, on the odds end at least, very likely to go on to the NBA Finals. Now, of course, they can't discredit Philadelphia because that team is very good as well. But I think that these are the 2 teams that you look at that, for example, for Milwaukee, you want to see Giannis eventually make a finals. I think that the development is slowly going that way. And for the Nets, I mean, it's win now or go home. It's just that simple. If they don't win now, they're in a lot of trouble. That team could depart during this offseason. So for them, they've got to, come with a little bit of a poise and a purpose. And, you mentioned a lack of defense against physical players. I really think Blake Griffin is going to have to step up this series and show the kind of defender that he at least used to be at some points back when he was with LA. Because, again, Giannis is not easy to defend. And I think, for example, trading away Jared Allen earlier this year really hurts them, because I really think he would have helped very much down low, when trying to stop a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo. But at the end of the day, I mean, Giannis is just he's a beast. You can't game plan. You can't stop him. Just like, for example, you can't stop Anthony Davis or LeBron or LA, but you can try to, slow them down a little bit. Giannis is a guy you can't stop. He may score 30 points a game minimal. And listen, give Jason Tatum, by the way, a lot of credit for Boston. Jason, when it comes to big games, really does show up and play good offense. So we can't deny that. So the fact of the matter is this: for Giannis, he's going to score. It's how you slow him down, and can you make those daggers and make those buckets when you need to. Otherwise, you're not going to win the series. But by far, this is the most pivotal series the Nets will face, and I think arguably the biggest one we'll see throughout the entirety of the NBA playoffs this year.
And I really think whoever wins this one has a serious chance at winning the title. I think Phoenix and I don't want to discredit Phoenix or Utah, but I don't know if they can go all the way to winning a championship. You never know. And the Sixers, I still just have lots of concerns with the Sixers, with them getting in each other's heads. Joel Embiid also shaken up and banged up after the first round. And the Sixers don't have much beyond that starting lineup. So, without their main core, and we know Embiid and Simmons can butt heads, and we know Embiid can go crazy in the playoffs too. You never know with that. And Doc Rivers, by the way, is not the best postseason coach. We saw it last year with the Clippers, but I think this Nets-Bucks series is going to go a long way. Last thing today on the show, we can check in a little bit about Major League Baseball. I mean, we're now 2 months into the season. We're starting to see which teams are real contenders, which teams are not. Of course, the Mets and Yankees still fighting the injury bug, but it's gotten a little better than it was a couple weeks ago for both of them. no hitters since we were last on, so at least that's kind of slowed down a little bit. But still been fun to watch. A lot of great series going on. I'm going to go over to Rahill first. What are some things that have surprised you? Some teams that have surprised you for good or for bad so far for the first 2 months of this Major League Baseball season?
How bad the Yankees are with runners in scoring position, and how dumb they are. I mean, I've told Tim this numerous times. I just don't think they're that great of a baseball team. I'm going to be completely honest with you. But the Padres also have been surprisingly great. We all knew that they were threats. I think it was you, Eddie, you actually picked them to win that division at the start of the season. But I mean, I know they've hit a 4-game losing streak, but they've been very good. Yu Darvish has been flying. Fernando Tatis is looking like the National League MVP. So I mean, but yeah, to be completely honest, I've been severely disappointed so far with the Yankees, especially with runners in scoring position. Apparently, they've had 28 base runners thrown out, and that's the most in the MLB. And to be completely honest, I wouldn't even be surprised if they don't make the playoffs at this rate. I really just don't have much optimism right now.
To me, the biggest surprise is just how the disparity between the AL East and the NL West, and then the other 4 divisions. I mean, the AL East, aside from Baltimore, you have 4 really good teams. Of course, Boston, it seems like all they needed was their manager back, and suddenly they're flowing again. Tampa Bay, once again, they trade away their starting shortstop. They're being sellers, and they're still winning games. It makes no sense how they're able to do this every year with these rosters where 20 of the 25 players you've never heard of before. Toronto, I mean, Vladdy is really starting to come around, and the rest of their young core, they're also pitching well. And then, I mean, the Yankees, yeah, they have some bad stretches, but they've also stayed afloat, and they have had some good offensive performances sometimes, but then they'll go to Detroit and get swept by them. But then in the NL West, I mean, the Diamondbacks and Rockies, not too good. But the other 3 teams, the Giants, surprisingly good. They're probably my biggest surprise this year. I'm really impressed with how San Francisco has played. This is a team that has sort of broken things down. Buster Posey, though, came back and had a really hot start through the first couple of weeks of the season. Their pitching is good. Their bullpen has been really good, too. And to have a bullpen that can sustain against the Dodgers and Padres, who, of course, have really strong arsenals, I mean, that's pretty nice to see. And they're hanging right there with San Diego and LA, who we thought would be good. And lastly, I mean, the Atlanta Braves are surprising me with how bad they have been, because they have not really been hurt by too many injuries, aside from Ozuna, who, of course, then got arrested, so we don't know when he's coming back. But, Freddie Freeman, Ronald Acuna Jr., Ozzie Albies, none of them really living up to their expectations, all of them playing a little below how we had expected them. And the Braves' young rotation, which was so elite during the 60-game season last year and through the postseason until the Dodgers series, is really struggling. Ian Anderson got knocked around by the Mets, I remember watching a few days ago. And I know they've been without a couple of players. Of course, Soroka's injury has been costly, but it's surprising to see how much the Braves have struggled. So finally, over to Tim, some surprises so far through the baseball season.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, at least in terms of teams that have surprised me a little bit, and Rahill mentioned it and hit it right on the nail. I really do feel that the San Diego Padres have been a massive, massive surprise, at least with what they've been able to do, successfully, both offensively and on the pitching end. First off, to knock off that, no-hitter. They needed that desperately. The only team in baseball that hadn't had a no-hitter until this year. That's incredible. The team, turned around, has found ways to be, as successful as can be. And let's be honest, too, for Fernando Tatis, I mean, he is mashing baseballs, but he's not hitting as well as what he typically does either, which to me is the even more crazier part. The fact of the matter is, too, this team overall has found ways to find productivity in different ways, even when they're not consistent, which really does go back to tell the tale of what a good baseball team looks like. And then you compare it to the disappointment. Of course, Rahill already alluded to the Yankees. I'll go on a rant if I talk about the Yankees, because I've talked about in the past, complacency gets you absolutely nowhere. And when you have guys like Brett Gardner, Kyle Higashioka, who are all batting, under 200 or Rougned Odor who's being paid to leave a team on your team, you're clearly not getting better. You're only regressing. And it's just that simply put, Yankees are by far the worst 500 baseball team, or above 500, I should say, baseball team I've seen in baseball history. And I mean that by far. But the biggest disappointment there has to be in baseball, and no one has talked about, and I'm pretty sure in my predictions this year, I predicted them to be a wild card contender. That's the Minnesota Twins. I mean, let's be honest. I thought the Twins, in what's pretty much a weak AL Central outside of the Chicago White Sox, had a big opportunity this year to step up and be competitive. I mean, don't get me wrong. The Cleveland Indians haven't had that bad of a year, but this team walks everyone around the diamond. They hardly get hit, but they walk everyone on planet Earth. That team should not be having the amount of success it should. Obviously, the Detroit Tigers, I thought were going to get a little bit better, and might add, at one point was leading the AL Central early in this season. But they've become, and again, granted, they swept the Yankees and, jumped up. In my opinion, they're worse than the Baltimore Orioles. That team can't hit, can't do anything right, and probably won't get better until Miguel Cabrera retires. It's just that simply put. But the fact that the Minnesota Twins have become the worst team in baseball at the moment, that is, just simply astounding. What happened to this team that a few years ago, after Joe Mauer retired, had a wonderful, wonderful rise? Nelson Cruz, remember, was mashing balls for them. You had Mitch Garver, who we argued was going to be a top 5 catcher in baseball and arguably up there with JT Realmuto for being the best. Yet he can't stay healthy or even hit above the Mendoza line anymore. But I guess he may have fallen down the same trap of Gary Sanchez. That infield used to be stacked too. Even when they had guys like Jonathan Scope in the past, obviously don't have him now as he's in Detroit, that team only looked like it was on a process of getting better. But yet they didn't. And might I add, they tried to make moves for their pitching staff. And the fact of the matter is that, to this point in the season, it's still a long way to go, granted, but the fact that they have the worst record in AL Central, and on top of it, they're behind the Kansas City Royals, who traded this past offseason for a guy that didn't even bat a 200 last year, of Andrew Benintendi. I really think shines a big light, especially for the fact that might I add too, Jorge Soler is having a terrible year for Kansas City, but yet they're still finding ways to win more baseball games than the Minnesota Twins. The Minnesota Twins, simply put, are an utter disappointment. And I'm not going to go deep about the Diamondbacks, but let's be honest, Madison Bumgarner getting slapped around and looking like he's ready to retire, that's another disappointing baseball team too that is absolutely lifeless.
Yeah, but with Arizona, honestly, with both of those teams, I'm really not that surprised personally. I did not pick Minnesota to make the playoffs. I had the White Sox and I had Cleveland both making the postseason, so that prediction's looking pretty good right now. But I don't know. I just feel like Minnesota kind of got lucky for a stretch because, of course, Cleveland had made their big run in 2016, hadn't come up the way they wanted to, but you had the White Sox, Detroit, and Kansas City all rebuilding at the exact same time. So Minnesota really didn't have, much competition. And the reason they had such inflated records over the past couple of years is because they had 57 games against the White Sox, the Tigers, and the Royals. That's what helped them to that absurd record back in 2019. That's how they did things. And think about what would happen every time they were in the playoffs. They'd get eliminated right away. I know there's talent on this team, but I'm not that shocked that this has happened because I really didn't think they were that great of a team to begin with during that stretch. And with the Diamondbacks, Madison Bumgarner is past his prime. I think we can all agree on that. Losing Paul Goldschmidt, of course, he was really the face of that franchise. There are a lot of people you've never heard of that are playing in the infield and the outfield for that Diamondbacks team, and they just cannot hit the ball at all. It's pretty bad. And the Mets, aside from David Peterson, one bad inning from David Peterson in that 3-game series, Arizona really couldn't do anything. It's not too good for them. But that's going to just about wrap up this show. We'll have a lot more next time. Rahill, thanks as always for joining us. And where can people find the Nothing But Sports podcast?
You can find the best way to do it is just Spotify, Nothing But Sports podcast. Google it. It should come up on Spotify. Easiest way to find it.
All right, sounds good. We'll be back next week. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off. This is Sports Speak. Have a great rest of your weekend.